It's just after midnight. Sahar Airport, Mumbai. July 4th, 1991. A chartered cargo aircraft sits on the tarmac with its rear ramp down. Two armored trucks pull up under heavy escort. Uniformed men step out, then stand aside. Inside the trucks, wooden crates, stamped, numbered, sealed. A customs officer watches. His ledger is open. He does not write. That was the instruction, later confirmed on the floor of India's parliament. Do not log these shipments. Because what was inside those crates was 46.91 tons of the Republic of India's sovereign gold. And almost everything you've heard about what happened next is wrong. You've probably seen the headlines. India sold its gold. 100 tons. It never came back. The records tell a different story, something more dangerous, something, in the end, cleverer. India did not sell its gold. It pledged it. Not 100 tons, 66.91. And every single bar that left Indian soil that summer was legally redeemed, and the loan fully repaid before the end of November 1991. Which leaves a question. When a nation-state has exhausted every other form of credit, when currency markets have closed to it, when commercial banks refuse its paper, when its own government has just collapsed, what, exactly, does the world still accept as collateral? To understand how India ended up flying its gold out of the country at 3 a.m, you have to go back 1 year, to the India of 1990. It was a specific kind of country then, a republic with a population approaching 840 million, running its economy through a system called the License Raj, a vast architecture of permits, quotas, and state approvals that decided who could manufacture what, in what quantity, and at what price. The state owned the steel mills, the state owned the airlines, the state owned the banks. Imports were rationed by the ministry. Industrial output in many sectors was decided by committee. It was not a poor country in the sense of having no resources. It was a country that had chosen a particular way of using them, and that choice had a cost. By March 1991, according to the International Monetary Fund's staff papers, India's external debt stood at approximately $69 billion. The fiscal deficit reached 9.4% of GDP in the 1990 to 91 year, according to the country's own economic survey. Debt service consumed close to 30% of every dollar the nation earned from exports. On paper, it held together. It held together because the trains ran, because the monsoons came, because the Gulf remittances kept flowing, Indians working abroad, sending dollars home. And then, in the summer of 1990, the Gulf stopped being a place Indians worked. It became a war zone. August 2nd, 1990. Iraqi tanks crossed the border into Kuwait. For the Indian economy, this was not a distant geopolitical event. It was a direct physical blow in two places at once. The first blow hit the oil barrel. Between August and November, the global crude price roughly doubled, from around $15 a barrel to around $30. India imported most of its oil. According to the 1991 economic survey, the petroleum import bill jumped from 6,273 crore rupees the previous year to 10,820. In dollar terms, a 58% increase. An additional burden of roughly $2.2 billion on a state already borrowing to stay solvent. The second blow hit the remittance pipeline. There were over 170,000 Indians working in Kuwait and Iraq when the invasion began. They could not stay. What followed, over the next 59 days, was the largest civilian airlift in human history. 488 flights, roughly 170,000 people brought home. One of those returnees was a business traveler named A.K. Banerjee. Banerjee had arrived in Kuwait exactly 1 day before the invasion. He endured 20 days of confinement under Iraqi occupation. During the evacuation, he volunteered as a courier, collecting letters and messages scrawled on whatever paper people could find, including discarded bus tickets, and carrying them back to Bombay for the families of Indians still stranded, according to reporting in The Hindu from late August 1990. He landed on August 21st. The country he returned to had a problem that was arithmetic, not ideological. Remittances had stopped. Oil imports had exploded. The rupee was under pressure. By October 1990, the Reserve Bank of India was imposing a 50% cash margin on non-capital goods imports, the first of what would become a ratcheting series of restrictions. And in that same October, the Indian Parliament passed a very quiet ordinance. It amended the Reserve Bank of India Act to allow the central bank to revalue its gold holdings closer to the international market price. Previously, that gold had been held on the books at 84 rupees and 39 pice per 10 grams, roughly 1/40th of what the metal actually traded for. A fiction that had been good enough for decades. It was no longer going to be good enough. The Chandrasekhar government, a minority government that had taken power in November 1990, was trying to pass an interim budget to restore credibility with international markets. It never got the chance. On the 2nd of March 1991, 2 constables of the Haryana police were arrested outside the residence of Rajiv Gandhi, the leader of the Congress Party, the very party whose outside support was keeping Chandrasekhar's government alive. They were accused of spying. Within days, Congress withdrew its support. The Finance Minister, Yashwant Sinha, had his budget prepared. On March 4th, Parliament refused to let him present it. The government collapsed, and in the rating agency offices in New York, Moody's and Standard & Poor's responded by downgrading India's sovereign debt to the bottom of investment grade. By May and June, further downgrades took India below investment grade entirely, which, in the language of international finance, meant this: the commercial credit markets of the world had just closed to the Republic of India. The reserves bled out faster. Between January and March, NRI deposit outflows averaged $76 million a month. Between April and June, they quadrupled, $310 million a month. On May 21st, in the middle of an election campaign in Tamil Nadu, Rajiv Gandhi was assassinated. The country went into national mourning. The markets did not. By June 1991, the Reserve Bank of India's foreign currency reserves had fallen to an exact figure, documented later by the Government of India's own post-crisis analysis, of $1.124 billion. 15 days of imports. 15 days. In the words of that same government report, a default on payments, for the first time in India's history, had become a serious possibility. That is the situation P.V. Narasimha Rao inherited when he was sworn in as Prime Minister on June 21, 1991. Cabinet Secretary Naresh Chandra briefed him 2 days before the ceremony. The briefing was described, by those present, as brief and specific. Rao responded by appointing the one person in India who had the technical credibility to do what had to be done next: a former Reserve Bank governor and academic economist named Manmohan Singh. The plan was already in motion when Manmohan Singh took office. It had been designed months earlier by a man named S. Venkitaramanan. Venkitaramanan was the sitting governor of the Reserve Bank of India, an Indian Administrative Service officer appointed to the post in December 1990, precisely as the crisis was accelerating. The contemporary financial press, watching him negotiate with international lenders one after another, gave him a nickname: the Lone Ranger. His plan had 2 phases. Phase 1 used gold the Indian state did not politically own. For years, Indian customs had been seizing gold from smugglers who worked the Gulf to Bombay corridor, gold that technically belonged to the government but was not part of the Reserve Bank's sovereign reserves. 20 tons of that confiscated metal were shipped, in 4 consignments, to the Union Bank of Switzerland in Zurich in May 1991. The transport: commercial flights via Swiss Air. The structure: a lease with a 6-month repurchase option. The proceeds: approximately $200 million in foreign currency. Phase 1 worked. Phase 1 was politically deniable. Phase 1 was not enough. because $200 million at June 1991 burn rates was roughly 3 weeks of runway. Phase 2 required something else. It required the Reserve Bank of India's own legally sovereign, properly owned gold to leave Indian soil. The legal mechanism, the October 1990 ordinance Venkitaramanan had pushed through, made the transaction possible. The political mechanism was harder. According to Dr. C. Rangarajan, then Deputy Governor of the RBI, Venkitaramanan personally briefed both Chandra Shekhar and, later, the Congress leadership on the statutory provisions. Rajiv Gandhi, before his assassination, reportedly replied with a single line, "Of what use is gold if it does not serve the national purpose in assisting the country in its difficulties?" Between July 4th and July 18th, 1991, in 4 chartered cargo flights, 46.91 tons of sovereign Indian gold were flown out of Sahar Airport. The destination? Vaults at the Bank of England in London and the Bank of Japan in Tokyo. The loan raised against it, $405 million. The commercial carriers, including Air India, had refused to fly the shipment. The insurance and security risks were unacceptable. The RBI chartered a specialist freight operator, and somewhere between the vault and the runway, on a public road in Mumbai, in broad daylight, in the middle of the operation, one of the armored vans broke down. A tire burst. The van steamed on the asphalt. Civilian officials in plain clothes stood around it. Inside, ingots of sovereign Indian gold. Rangarajan would later describe the moment in his memoir, Forks in the Road. The convoy was recovered, his word, before any public discovery. The mourning around them, apparently, carried on as it always had. One of the most consequential logistical operations in 20th century sovereign finance nearly ended, for a moment, on a Mumbai road in July heat. It did not end there. The gold reached the vaults. And on July 24th, while the last flights were still being cleared, Manmohan Singh rose in the Lok Sabha to deliver his first budget speech as finance minister. He announced, in sequence, the new industrial policy, which effectively ended the license Raj, the termination of export subsidies, and the restructuring of tariffs. Near the end of the speech, let the whole world hear it loud and clear. India is now wide awake. It is worth understanding Venkitaramanan's calculations and Singh's budget and Rangarajan's broken-down van as history, as a window into how a state actually behaved when the systems it relied on stopped working, not as a prescription for any decision today. This is where the public memory breaks from the historical record. In the years since, a story has settled into common knowledge that India sold its gold in 1991, that the amount was 100 tons, that the gold never came home. Every part of that is wrong. India did not sell. India pledged. The 46.91 tons shipped to London and Tokyo were collateral under a repurchase agreement, a swap of physical metal for foreign currency, with a contractual obligation to repay the loan and redeem the gold. According to the Reserve Bank's own annual report for 1991 to 92, and confirmed 30 years later on the floor of India's Rajya Sabha, that $405 million loan was fully repaid between September and November 1991. The ownership of every bar was legally restored to India. The 20-ton Phase 1 transaction with UBS was also repurchased. As for 100 tons, that figure does not come from 1991 at all. It comes from May 2024. In that month, the Reserve Bank of India quietly repatriated 100 tons of gold from the Bank of England's vaults back to domestic storage. That gold was separately held sovereign reserves, unrelated to the 1991 loan, which had been closed 3 decades earlier. The public has collapsed 2 different events, separated by 33 years, into one false memory. The truth is less dramatic in some ways, and far more precise. 1991 was not the year India sold its gold. It was the year India pledged its gold, and then, 4 months later, bought it back. Which returns us to the question the hook left open. When India had exhausted every other form of credit, when no commercial bank would advance a dollar against its paper, why was physical gold the one thing that still cleared? The answer is not mystical. It is mechanical. A gold bar, once assayed and stamped by a recognized refinery, does not depend on the solvency of the country that issued it. It does not depend on a rating agency. It does not depend on a currency regime. It does not depend on a government surviving. It weighs what it weighs. The Bank of England vault, accepting a sealed Indian shipment in July 1991, did not need to form a view on the political future of the Republic of India. The assay was the guarantee. That is what collateral denominated in physical mass means. And it is why, when paper credit evaporated, the gold still moved. But the record from 1991 shows more than just the property of a metal. It shows a particular kind of execution. Venkitaramanan's success depended on technical authority that predated the crisis. He knew the RBI Act. He knew the statutory provisions. He knew, before anyone asked him, what was legally possible. Manmohan Singh's success, weeks later, depended on something else. A prime minister willing to absorb the political cost of every unpopular measure and leave the finance minister room to execute. Narasimha Rao did that. According to his biographer Vinay Sitapati, it is the single reason the reforms survived the coalition. And the third condition, the quietest one, was that the Indian state had somewhere to turn physically, not just politically. The confiscated smuggler metal that provided Phase 1 cover, the official sovereign reserves that enabled Phase 2, these were not separate from the crisis. They were what the crisis used. 5 documented cases, 1 documented pattern. When fiat credit failed, physical mass cleared. When political consensus collapsed, technocratic authority executed. When formal reserves were politically untouchable, informal reserves bridged the gap. This is what the forensic record of 1991 actually shows. Not a story about gold as an investment, a story about what a state did when it had run out of every other option, and what, at that point, still worked. In May of 2024, a different kind of aircraft flew a different direction. The Reserve Bank of India brought 100 tons of its own gold home, from the same Bank of England vaults where the 1991 bars had once sat as collateral. It was, in its way, a bookend, not to the loan that had been closed for 3 decades, but to the idea that sovereign gold held somewhere else under someone else's ledger, even with a modest deposit yield, is gold you do not fully control. The India of 2024 has reserves the India of 1991 could not have imagined. Over 850 tons of official gold. Foreign currency reserves far beyond what the crisis generation ever held. And still, the 100 tons came home. Because the lesson of Sahar Airport at 3 in the morning, of a van breaking down on a Mumbai road, of a governor personally supervising crates onto chartered cargo flights, is a specific one. A country learns, once, what its last resort actually looks like, and it remembers. Venkitaramanan died in early 2024, just months before that repatriation. Dr. Manmohan Singh died in December of the same year. Between them, they saw their country go from 15 days of imports to one of the fastest growing major economies in the world. The gold they pledged came home. And so did some of the gold they never pledged at all. One question before you go. In India, for generations, families have kept physical gold, a coin, a bangle, a single chain, specifically for the moment when everything else might stop working. Has there been something like that in your own family? A specific object kept for a specific reason that was never really about ornament? The comments are open.